Hello guys, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto was the last Jedi of the Hidden Leaf? Naruto x Tenten x Star Wars Part 1. It was a stormy September night. Naruto was 5 years old. He was currently hiding in the forest of death. He found a hole to crawl through when he was being chased by some drunk villagers. Not being ninja and adults, they were unable to go through the hole or over the wall surrounding the area. Naruto sat panting, listening to the storm raging overhead and the villagers walking away cursing him. Naruto sighed and said, "Why is it they do that to me? I have not done anything wrong." A voice said, "You right, Naruto. It pains me to see you like this." Naruto looked around and said, "Who's there?" The voice said as a man mostly appeared in a white cloak with red flames and blonde hair, "I am your father Naruto. I know why this happened to you, but I don't have time to tell you now. Listen carefully. I want you to talk to the Hokage and tell him to take you to my ship. It's time you learned about your past. He will know what to do. Remember son, I love you." Before he faded away, Naruto sat there cold and slowly fell asleep. When Naruto woke up, he was in a hospital room. He looked over and saw the Hokage sitting in a chair asleep. Naruto coughed and the third woke up. The third smiled and said, "It seems you got yourself in trouble, Naruto." Naruto said, "Old man, I know this is going to sound weird, but my father said for you to take me to his ship. It's time to learn about my past." The third paled and said, "So I guess he was right after all." Naruto said, "Who was he anyways? I think I have seen him before, but I don't know where." The third said, "I will tell you later. For now rest and I shall get everything ready." Naruto nodded and fell back asleep. The third sighed and thought, "I hope you're ready, Naruto." When Naruto awoke again, he was on the ground surrounded by woods. The third was sitting by a fire cooking some fish. He turned to Naruto and said, "I am glad you are awake. We are almost there, but you will have to do the rest on your own. I am not allowed past this point." Naruto took the fish the third offered and said, "Where do I go and what's going on?" The third said, "After you finish eating, you will head to your left down that path of dead trees. You will come to a cave you must enter. A door will be there that has a seal on it. Cut your hand and put some blood on the seal. When the door opens, a weird looking object will be inside. Walk inside and take a seat. When you do, say begin journey. The ship will do the rest. I can't tell you more because I don't know." Naruto nodded and said, "What will happen to me?" The third said, "I honestly don't know. You will find out when on your own. I am sorry to do this, Naruto, but I have to go. If I am gone any longer, the village will know something is up. If and when you return, come to my office, but don't tell anyone but me or the Hokage who you are. I know this may sound stupid or something, but your dad would say this to his closest friends when they would get ready to leave. May the force be with you." And then he left in a swirl of leaves. Naruto quickly ate and walked down the path he was told about and soon found the cave. When he entered it, he felt weird. He walked into the cave that was lit up by some weird light and came to the door he was told about. He bit his thumb and wiped some blood in it, and the door glowed red before falling off to the ground into a pile of rubble. Naruto carefully walked over it and entered a wide room. Inside was a circular-looking object that was as big as a house with a ramp coming out of it. Think Ebon Hawk and Millennium Falcon crossover. Naruto slowly walked up the ramp, and when he stepped on the metal, the object lit up. Naruto jumped back and the lights went off. He slowly walked back on it, and when the lights came on, he slowly walked on. Once he made it all the way on, he walked toward what looked like a door and he heard a hissing sound behind him. He turned and saw the ramp came up and sealed itself away. Naruto tried to push it to get out but found he was stuck. He thought, now what? Naruto, finding he could not open it, headed toward the door he saw earlier, and when he got closer, the door opened with a hiss sound. Naruto went into what looked like some weird front room. He was tired, so he sat down on one of the weird tall chairs. A funky voice said, "Where to?" Naruto jumped and looked around and said, "Hello." The voice said, "Aegean, Where to? Naruto thought for a moment and remember what the third said and said, begin journey. The voice said, confirmed. Prepare for liftoff. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Naruto quickly got into his seat and when the voice said, lift off, Naruto was thrown out of his chair by the entire room shaking and he flew back hitting his head against a wall knocking himself out. Naruto awoke to find himself in front a huge cage and saw the word seal on a piece of paper on the cage. Behind the cage a giant fox with red eyes. Naruto was scared until the fox said, well I will give that bastard this one. He sure knew his seals. Now Naruto being the great genius he is said, huh. The fox sighed and said, I guess it would help if I started from the beginning. My name is Kyuubi no Kitsune. I am the nine-tailed demon lord and the guardian of the fire country. I have lived for over 10,000 years. I am here now because your father sealed me into you the day you were born to stop me without killing me and we are in your mind. I attacked your village and tried to destroy it to get at your father. I was put under control of an evil man in a black cloak. I don't know who he is but he was able to control me like I was nothing. Are you with me so far? Naruto said, I don't understand really. Kyuubi sighed and said, well I would talk to you some more but 2 weeks have already passed and we have company. And with that Naruto was pushed out of his mind. When Naruto woke up he looked up and saw a woman in a black-brown cloak sitting in a chair looking at him and he noticed he was not on that metal thing anymore but in some house. The woman had brown hair and brown eyes and smiled at him and said, so I take it that it is time. Naruto sat up and said, who are you and where am I? The woman sighed and said, well as for where you are on the planet Kararian. As for who I am Naruto, I would be Elisa your mother. Naruto started backing away pointing his finger at her waving it and had the other one over his mouth trying not to say something he would regret. Elisa seeing this sighed and said, before you get upset let me tell you what has happened and what is going on now and why I was not there for you. Naruto stopped pointing and just nodded his head and Elisa said, I guess you could say it started nearly 200 years ago. A war was being waged. The galaxy was in turmoil. Almost everyone was affected. The Republic was losing until the Galactic Guardians of Peace started joining in to help the fighting end. These Guardians were called Jedi. Now even with the Jedi help the Republic still lost a lot of people and many Jedi died. When the war ended peace tried to start Aegean but a group of Jedi who were consumed by evil desire turned to the dark side of the Force and started killing the regular Jedi. Naruto said, what is the Force? Elisa said, the Force is an energy that binds all living things to it. Naruto said, like chakra. Elisa said, no, chakra is nothing compared to the Force. Chakra is made of natural energy. The Force is the power of all living energy put together. Anyways, these Jedi that became consumed by evil desires were known as Sith. The Jedi were nearly killed completely off. Finally the Sith were stopped and the Jedi that remained started rebuilding. Sadly there were not that many. Your great-great-grandfather and his brother were both Jedi and came to your world to try to live a hermit life but after they saw the suffering started helping unite some people together. Now that was all and good and they even helped create the village you lived in but the problems of the galaxy were still out there. Anyways they both started family which I am sad to say not many that I know of still remain. As far as I know only you and possibly one other is all that remains of them. Naruto said, so I have other family. Elisa said, I don't know. She might still be alive but I truly don't know. Anyways back to what I was saying. The Jedi started rebuilding but some Sith still remained. They stayed hidden and when the time was right they started hunting Jedi Aegean. I was in Jedi Knight and I was confronted by one of the Sith. My master died saving me but she told me about where you family was and told me to go there for protection and to warn them of the threat that would come looked for them. I did and that is where I met your father. I was only 16 at the time and your father was 17. At first I was unsure of him but I felt a connection through the Force with him and after some time we fell in love and got married in secret. Normally that would not be allowed, but I was willing to give up being a Jedi for him. I later learned that he was a descendant of the original Jedi and I started teaching him about the Force. He became very skilled in the Force and soon he was even better than I was at most things. He taught me about chakra and how to use it as well as a few jutsu. I soon became pregnant with you and we were happy. Sadly, the Sith that had attacked me a few years before had followed me to the planet and soon started hunting down anyone who might be a Jedi. His name was Darth Chaos. He soon found me and would have killed me, but your father was able to save me, but sadly he escaped. When it was almost time for you to be born, he used the Force to turn the creature that I am not sure if you are aware of against Konoha in hopes that the creature would either kill or weaken your father enough so he could kill him and me. Naruto said, "You mean Kyuubi?" Elisa shook her head yes and said, "How do you know of it?" Naruto said, "When I was coming here I somehow met it and he told me about being controlled but did not know who he was. Just that he dressed in a black cloak." Elisa sighed and said, "Well, at least you know, so I can tell you everything. When the Kyuubi attacked, Chaos attacked secretly and confronted me and nearly killed me, causing me to go into labor early. Your father arrived and scared him off and took me to the hospital. He was sad because he was the Hokage and his people were dying and he had to find a way to stop the attack. He learned of a sealing method to stop the creature and being a sealmaster himself created a different seal and sealed the Kyuubi into you. He willingly gave himself to the Force and when he did the Shinigami allowed it since he still would die and was not strong enough to fight the Force itself. Anyways, while this was happening, Chaos came back Aegean and tried to kill me while I was weakened, but a shinobi saved my life at the last second and gave me a chance to escape. Chaos started following me and soon I made it to my ship and escaped before he killed me. I had no choice but to trust you to the village hoping Arashi plan would work and you would be seen as a hero. I can already tell by looking at some of you memories that it has not been so and I am sorry for that. I had planned to come after you but I have only been able to lose Chaos in the past 6 months. I don't know how but I did. Anyways, you father and I had made a plan after the first time Chaos attacked and we got a ship ready and this was the meeting spot to meet. We thought he would have to come and me and you would be safely hidden, but you know what they say about the best laid plans. Naruto sat in silence and sighed and said, "I guess I can forgive you, mother." Anything else he might have said stopped when he was engulfed in a hug. After he was released he said, "So what happens now?" Elisa said, "Well, I am going to start training you in the ways of the Force to be a Jedi and also teach you everything I know about chakra. For now I want you to get some sleep, we have a lot to do and I don't know how long it will take." And so Naruto new life began. Time skip 7 years later. The third Hokage was sitting in his office sighing as he was trying to figure out how to solve a problem with this year's Genin class. He had enough people for all teams but one. He needed one more to balance them out. He was brought out of his though by a knock on the door. The third looked up and said, "Enter." The third watched as someone about 5 feet 10 in a brown cloak walked into his office with the hood covering his head so he could not see his features. The third said, "Can I help you?" The person said, "I see the Force is still strong in you, old man." The third blinked and blinked Aegean and said, "Arashi." The figure removed his hood and said, "Close but not quite. It me, Naruto. I am back." The third walked around his desk and hugged Naruto and said, "Welcome back, so tell me what happened." Naruto said, "I don't know where to begin. I know about who my parents were. I met my mother." The third said, "Elisa is still alive." Naruto looked sad and said, "Was. She died about 2 years ago defending me." The third sighed and said, "I am sorry. Do you want to tell me about it?" Naruto sighed and said, "Flashback. Naruto and Elisa were on Jejirvji in the Outer Rim Galaxy. Naruto had progressed amazingly in the past 5 years and he was even more powerful in the Force than both his parents. He had already learned everything his mother could teach him and they were currently at one of the hidden Jedi enclaves furthering his training. There was only 10 Jedi at the enclave at any one time to limit the chance of another massacre happening. Naruto was meditating in the garden when the enclave was rocked by a giant explosion. Naruto quickly got up and activated his standard lightsaber that he made to become a Padawan. The blue blade shone of the care he took to make it. Suddenly a group of 30 men came in with 2 of them in black cloaks holding red lightsabers. The other men had blasters. They started shooting at anything that moved. Naruto deflected all the shots that came at him and found cover. He saw several people die. Mostly from the attacking men. Naruto was looking for a way out when he saw the highest-ranking Jedi Master there be struck down by one of the men in black cloaks. He saw his mother hiding behind some boulders from the attacks. Naruto looked around and saw some boulders that had been blasted from the wall by the random blaster fire. Naruto concentrated and used the force to pick up the boulders and launch them at the men, killing several. His mother also doing the same thing. She looked over at him and motioned toward the door to exit the enclave. Naruto nodded and started backing away. Elisa jumped up also and started blocking anything that came at her son. Suddenly one of the 2 men with lightsabers held up his hands and shot lightning out at her. She blocked it with her lightsaber, but when the other one started hurling boulders at her, she could not defend. She was hit in the leg and you could hear the bone shatter. Naruto ran back to help her and she looked at him and screamed, "No, go, I love you son. Don't worry about me." She then used the force to cave in the roof separating them. Naruto screamed and tried to get to her but heard her screams and then felt her die in the force. He turned and left going to where his ship was hidden. Once he made it to his ship he left and once in hyperspace finally cried. End flashback. The third looked down and said, "Do you know who they were?" Naruto said, "Yes. They were Sith. One of them was Darth Chaos. I met him and was able to escape thanks to Kyuubi." The third stiffened and said, "So you know?" Naruto said, "Yes, I know about Kyuubi and I also know Darth Chaos was the one responsible for its attack." The third said, "So what have you done for the last 2 years?" Naruto said, "Trained and ran from the Sith." The third said, "So what do you plan to do now?" Naruto said, "Well, I figure I might as well defend what my family helped create, see if my other relative is still alive and also bide my time until he returns so I can stop the Sith." The third thought for a moment and said, "Do you know anything about your other family?" Naruto said, "Only thing I know is that she is a female and that her grandfather and brother helped build this village. Other than that, no." The third thought for a moment and said, "I think I might know who she is but I don't know where she is or if it is the same person. If it is then she is alive. Her family for the most part is secretive." Naruto said, "That would be understandably since they were Jedis also, or at least some of them were." The third said, "So what do you know about being a ninja?" Naruto said, "I know Kujbunshin, Henge, a genjutsu to cover my whiskers, replacement, tree climbing, water walking and that's it besides how to throw shurikens and kunia. But I am ranked as a Jedi Knight. My skills in the Force are better than both my parents." The third said, "Well, that would put you at a genin level ninja and it just so happens that I was having a problem with that you can help with. Now all I have to do is list you as a genin and give you a headband and then meet at the academy for team placement at room 201. Naruto said, "If it would be possible, can we change my name for the official records until I can reach the stipulation for my family name, and speaking of, what exactly are they?" The third thought and said, "The stipulations are you are getting married, your blood family returns and claims you, or you become Chunin. Since that taken care of, very well, you can change your name. That way you won't have to worry about the people thinking you're Kyuubi. What name would you like?" Naruto said, "Since my mother death I have went by the name Ranger." The third smiled and said, "That should work. I will put you down as an orphan stating your parents were retired nins but because of their enemies your last name will be kept secret." Naruto nodded and asked, "Where will I stay?" The third reached into draw and said, "You remember that ramen stand you used to love?" Naruto nodded and the third said, Across the street is apartment complex that had been built recently, and I own a apartment for guests that you can have for 100 ryu a month. Here is also some money from your family account to get you anything you need, as he handed a wallet full of money. Naruto took it and bowed and said, "See you later, old man, and may the force be with you," as he left. The third smiled and wrote down Ranger for Team 7 and thought to himself, things are going to get interesting around here. Naruto got a bite to eat at the ramen stand and went to look at his new apartment. Once he made it in, he saw it was actually pretty nice and took a shower before laying down to get some sleep. The next morning Naruto got up early and realized he was going to have to get some new cloths. He started looking around town and soon felt a disturbance in the force and found a shop that looked promising. The Wolf Claw Weapon Shop. He went in and started looking around and soon found a shuriken and kunai holster. Standard black ninja outfits, sealing scrolls, shurikens and kunai, and first aid kits. Naruto walked to the register and a girl about his age with brown hair with brown eyes was behind the counter. She smiled at him and said, "Welcome to the Wolfclaw Weapon Shop. Did you find everything okay?" Naruto said, "Yes, I did. I was wondering, could you tell me where the academy is? I am supposed to meet my team there today." The girl smiled and said, "Yes, all you do is go 3 blocks up and you will see Yamanko Flower Shop. When you do, turn right and go down the street. You can't miss it." Naruto quickly paid and went to a dressing room before changing. When he came back out, he had his new cloths and gear on, but he also had his brown cloak on. He walked to the counter and said, "Thanks, Aegean Miss." The girl said, "Tenten. My family does not have a surname. And you are?" Naruto smiled and said, "I go by Ranger, and it was nice to meet you, Tenten," as he left. Tenten could not help but think, what an interesting guy. Naruto quickly found the academy and was about to enter when a ABNU with the letters NA on his mask appeared and said, "Halt, state your name and reason here." Naruto waved his hand and said, "You don't need to know why I am here." The ABNU said, "I don't need to know why you are here." Naruto then said, "Sorry about the trouble, go about your business." The ABNU said, "Sorry to trouble you, you may go," and left in a swirl of leaves. Naruto sighed and thought, weak-minded fools, as he entered the academy. Naruto made it to room 201 and sat in the back of class. So far he was the only one there. Slowly the room started to fill up. Almost no one noticed him, and the ones who did never said anything to him. Finally a man walked in with a scar across his face and brown hair. The man said, "Settle down, class." Almost everyone said, "Yes, Iruka-sensei." The man now identified as Iruka said, "Okay, teams are as follows. Team 7 Sasuke, Sakura, and Ranger." Just then a blonde girl stood up and said, "Iruka, why does Forehead get to be with Sasuke, and who the hell is Ranger?" Iruka said, "Ino, the Hokage made the list and I assume the person at the top of the stairs in the corner would be Ranger." Naruto just nodded his head, but all anyone saw was his cloak move up and down. Ino crossed her arms and threw herself back into her seat. Iruka sighed and said, "Team 8 is Hinata, Shino, and Kiba. Team 9 is still active, so Team 10 will be Choji, Shikamaru, and Ino." The pink-haired girl who squealed when she heard her name with Sasuke said, "Take that, Ino pig." Naruto sighed and thought, why do I have all the luck with idiots? In the Hokage office, the Hokage and all the Junin watched the events, and Asuma said, "What's up with that cloaked boy, Ranger?" Kakashi sighed and said, "He does not look like much to me. Sigh. I guess I have to take what I get to get the last Uchiha." The Hokage started to chuckle and then turned into full-blown laughter, and everyone looked at him. He finally stopped and said, "Kakashi, I would watch myself around Ranger. If he used his full skill, he could probably give me a run for my money. He may not have many jutsu, but he has some other skills that will surprise you." Kakashi said, "What do you mean?" The third said, "You will see. Good luck." Everyone started to leave wondering what he meant. Back at the academy, the sensei started to come pick up the students one by one until only Team 7 was left. 3 hours later of Sakura trying to get Sasuke attention and Naruto meditating. Finally, a man with silver hair and his height covering one eye walked in and said, "My first impression is, I don't like you. Meet on the roof." As he disappeared, the 3 students went to the roof and the man said, "Okay, let's do introduction." Sakura said, "You first, sensei." The man sighed and said, "Name's Kakashi. I have likes and dislikes, and my dreams for the future are none of your business." "You next, Pinky." Sakura said, "My name is Sakura, not Pinky. I like my dreams, and my dislike is Ino." She looked at Sasuke. Kakashi said, "You next," pointing to Sasuke. Sasuke said, "My name is Sasuke. I don't have a dream, just an ambition, to kill a certain man and revive my clan." Kakashi said, "Okay, you next." Naruto said, "My name is Ranger. My dream is to protect what my family helped start and meet my only living relative and to stop a certain group." Kakashi said, "Okay, meet at the memorial stone tomorrow at 5 a.m. for a test and don't be late, and oh, don't eat or you will throw up." CYA. Kakashi disappeared in a puff of smoke. Sasuke got up and started to walk away with Sakura following. Naruto sighed and leapt off the side of the building using the force to slow his fall. He then started to walk through town. As he was walking through town, he heard someone screaming coming from a barbecue restaurant. Naruto went to investigate. When he got inside, he saw 2 men wearing green spandex hugging and saying, "Gaisen-si, Lee, Gai-sensei, Lee." He sighed and started to leave, but he saw the girl from the weapon shop earlier sitting at a table by them and a boy with white eyes getting up and leaving. Naruto decided to be friendly, walked over and said, "Hi, Aegean." Tenten looked up and said, "Hi, did you find the academy okay?" Naruto said, "Yes, I did, and I wanted to tell you thanks." Tenten said, "No problem." Naruto said, "So do you have plans for today?" Tenten said, "Not really, why?" Naruto said, "I only got back to town yesterday evening and I have been gone for a long time, and I was wondering if you would not mind showing me around and let me take you out to eat later." Tenten looked over at her sensei and he was still hugging Lee and said, "Sure, why not?" as she got up and started to leave with Naruto following her. When they got outside, she said, "So what would you like to see first?" Naruto said, "It's up to you. Everything is different and I enjoy having company when walking." Tenten blushed and started walking left and said, "So you said you just got back to town, where have you been?" Naruto said, "I went on a journey and met my mother. She told me about my family and also about my history and trained me in my family ways. She also told me why she was not around for me." Tenten said, "I am sorry." Naruto said, "Don't be. If she would not have left me to people she trusted, I probably would have been killed by the people who tried to kill my family." Tenten said, "So where is she?" Naruto sighed and said, "She was killed a little over 2 years ago by the people who are after my family." Tenten said, "So what did you train in?" Wanting to change subjects. Naruto smiled as they had walked outside the main part of the village and were in a meadow and said, "I was trained in the force," and a red rose came floating over from the flowers and Naruto had it float in front of Tenten and she grabbed it. She turned to him and said, "How did you do that?" Naruto said, "That was the force." Tenten said, "What is the force?" Naruto turned to her and said, "It is a life energy that connects all living things together." Tenten said, "I don't understand." Naruto said, "I said the same thing when my mother told me about it. Basically, it's like chakra but more powerful and abundant. Chakra in natural energy made by things. The force is created from the living energy of all life, not just inside of one object but in trees, plants, the water, the sky, other people, even this planet and others." Tenten said, "Must be exciting." Naruto said, "It is as long as you stay away from the dark side." Tenten said, "The dark side?" Naruto sighed and said, "Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate is the power of the dark side. Basically, there is a balance in the universe, good and evil. In the Force, there is also a balance. Those who protect and use the Force for good are Jedis, those who would use the Force for evil or greed are Sith. The Sith are consumed by their own greed and ambitions to do what they want. They only care about power and themselves. Tenten said, "So what are you?" Naruto said, "I am a Jedi like my parents before me." Tenten said, "So why are you telling me all this and don't tell me it's because you just wanted to? I am a ninja and been trained to look underneath the underneath, and I know people don't open up like this without a reason." Naruto chuckled and said, "You're right. This morning when I entered your family shop I sensed something in the Force. I have not felt someone who was strong in the Force since my mother passed away and you remind me of her." Tenten said, "So?" Naruto said, "I have not really opened up around anyone since my mother passed away and I can tell I can trust you. I need someone here who I can trust. Sure, I have the old man." Tenten said, "Who is the old man?" Naruto said, "The Hokage. He always let me call him the old man." Tenten chuckled at that and said, "I got to be around when you call him that." Naruto smiled and said, "I am sure you will get a chance." Tenten said, "So who did you get for teammates?" Naruto sighed and said, "I got Sasuke, who has a stick up his Sakura, who is obsessed with Sasuke, and our sensei is a lazy goofball who sent a Kajbunshin to meet us today. His name is Kakashi." Tenten gasped and started to laugh. Naruto said, "What?" Tenten said, "Your sensei and mine are considered eternal rivals. Gaizensei is always talking about Kakashi." Naruto said, "Well then, when he does something stupid I can tell you and you won't think it's weird." Tenten put her hands on her hips and said, "And what makes you think I am willing to listen to you?" Naruto said, "Simple. If you did not like the idea I can tell you would have already walked off." Tenten sighed and said, "I guess you're right, so what did you mean when you said I was strong in the Force?" Naruto said, "I can show you, but you would have to trust me." Tenten thought for a minute and said, "Sure, why not?" Naruto sat down in a meditation position and said, "Sit like I am and relax." He waited, then said, "Good, now close your eyes and instead of meditating on your body start listening to the world around you and don't really listen to the sound, try and feel the sounds and the energy around you. At first you should not see or feel anything but." Tenten gasped and said, "What the?" Naruto looked up and said, "What?" Tenten said, "I was doing what you said, but all of a sudden a bright flash happened and I could then start seeing blurs of bright colors even though I had my eyes closed." Naruto started chuckling and said, "Congrats, you just took your first step into a larger world. That bright color you saw was the Force. With practice you will be able to see and feel everything around you even without meditating." Tenten was amazed and said, "What else could I learn?" Naruto thought for a moment and said, "I won't lie to you. If you decide to learn anything more from the Force you will learn many things, some that will make you question your beliefs, and you will also be tempted by evil. Also you would have to worry about the Sith." Tenten thought for a moment and said, "I think I would like that, master." Naruto held up his hand and said, "I am not a master myself. I had only received the rank of knight. Only a few ever make it to master." Tenten said, "Tell me about the Jedi." Naruto said, "The Jedi have been the guardian of peace and justice of the galaxy for years. Nearly 200 years ago there was a great war and most of them died or consumed by the dark side of the Force. They became the Sith and started hunting the Jedi. Today not many survive." Tenten said, "Why do you talk about planets and galaxy like you do?" Naruto chuckled and said, "Do you believe that this world is the only one in the galaxy that has life?" Tenten said, "I guess I never really thought about it." Naruto said, "Don't worry about it, I can tell you that there are more than I can count and many different species." Tenten said, "How do you know?" Naruto said, "I have seen some of them." Tenten started laughing and said, "You had me there." Naruto said, "Believe what you want." Tenten said, "You were serious." Naruto sighed and looked at the sky and said, "We can talk about it later. It's getting late and I have to get up early for a test." Tenten got up and said, "You are a mystery, you know that." Naruto said, "All shall be revealed in time," as they both started walking back toward town. It was not long till they made it to the weapon shop and Tenten said, "Well, this is where I live." Naruto looked at it and said, "Well, at least I know where to come find you." Tenten said, "When will I see you, Aegean?" Naruto thought for a moment and said, "How about we meet on top of the Hokage monument at 4 p.m. tomorrow?" Tenten said, "Sure, as long as I don't have a mission." Naruto grabbed her hand and kissed it and said, "May the force be with you," and turned to leave, not noticing the blush on Tenten's face. Naruto walked into his apartment and sighed before thinking, "What am I doing?" He then went to get ready for bed after a shower and went to sleep. The next day Naruto walked into the training ground. Kakashi told them to meet and saw his teammates already there but no Kakashi. He went and sat against a tree and started meditating. 3 hours later Kakashi arrived and said, "Yo." Sakura screamed, "You're late." Kakashi's sweat dropped and said, "Anyways. You have 2 hours to get these 2 bells from me or you all fail. The one who does not get the bell fails and goes back to the academy." Sakura said, "There are only 2 bells, sensei." Naruto said, "You already failed the test, Sakura." Everyone looked at him and Sakura said, "What do you mean?" Naruto said, "The bells are meaningless. The test is about teamwork." Kakashi's sweat dropped and Sakura said, "You don't know what you're talking about." Naruto said, "Sasuke, will you work with me?" Sasuke said, "Why would I? You would hold me back." Naruto said, "What about you, Sakura?" Sakura said, "I don't need your help. Sasuke will get a bell for me." Naruto looked at Kakashi and held out his hand and both bells flew at him and he handed them to both Sasuke and Sakura and said, "Your choice, Kakashi. I will be back tomorrow at 7. If we pass, meet here then. If not, I tried." And he walked off. Sasuke was brooding, wanting to know how he did that, and Sakura was screaming that her and Sasuke did it. Kakashi looked at the retreating figure, sweat dropping, and turned to the other 2 students and said, "He's right, you both failed, but since he passed and gave you the bells, I guess you pass." Sasuke said, "What are you talking about?" Kakashi said, "This was a team test. He knew what it was and you both failed, but because he passed both parts, one am passing you. Meet here tomorrow at 7. I have other things to do." And he left in a swirl of leaves. Sasuke was brooding and started to leave. Sakura, not even thinking about what Kakashi said, was hounding him for a date. Naruto went and was eating at the ramen stand by his apartment when he felt someone coming that he was getting to know pretty well. He turned and saw Tenten walking toward him. He turned and she walked up and sat beside him and said, "So how was your test?" Naruto said, "I don't know, I passed but my 2 teammates were idiots and failed to see what the test really was. I gave them the bells and said I would meet at the same spot tomorrow at 7. What about you?" Tenten had ordered her food and said, "Guy Sensei cancelled training when him and Lee were working on some stupid move and Lee hurt himself." Naruto said, "So what do you have planned for the rest of the day?" Tenten said, "I have to work at my family shop at 11 today, but I was going to work on my weapon training until then after I ate." Naruto said, "Want any help?" Tenten said, "Sure." As Naruto and Tenten walked to the training ground, Tenten said, "So what weapons do you use besides the force?" Naruto said, "I can use kunai and shurikens, but I prefer my lightsaber." Tenten asked, "Lightsaber?" Naruto said, "It is the weapon of a Jedi. Each Jedi must make their own once they are ready to become a Padawan." Tenten asked, "What's a Padawan?" Naruto said, "Jedi are ranked from highest to lowest as follows: Jedi Master, Jedi Knight, Padawan, and Youngling. Right now you are considered a Youngling until you make your own lightsaber." Tenten said, "So how do you go about making one?" Naruto said, "First you must find a crystal that is in harmony with you. Then you must make a container and a power source. Then you use the force and embed the crystal with the power source in the container you choose. Each lightsaber is unique to the individual. When you get better, you can use one lightsaber, two lightsabers, or dual lightsabers. Tenten asked, "What is yours?" Naruto said, "Right now I have a single, but I am planning on going to a dual." Tenten said, "So Ranger, I have been wondering, is that your real name?" Naruto was in silence for a few moments and said, "No. It's the name I started using after my mother was killed. I actually have two other names. One is my true name that I have only had for a few hours, and one is the name I was given to protect me from my father's enemies, both here in this village and in others." Tenten said, "Can I know your real name?" Naruto said, "I promise you that you will be the first to know it when I can use it." Tenten nodded and they arrived at the training ground her team uses. They both walked several feet apart and Tenten unsealed a sword and Naruto pulled his cloak back to one side and stuck out his hand, and a silver cylinder flew to his hand, and when it hit it activates with a hiss, and Tenten jumped back and looked on with awe and said, "Raijin." Naruto said, "Do what?" Tenten blinked and said, "Sorry, it's just that your lightsaber looks like something I saw in a history book for our village. The second Hokage had a weapon like that, but it was a yellow blade instead of blue. Is something wrong?" Naruto was smiling and said, "Do you know if the second Hokage had a brother and if any of their descendants are still alive?" Tenten said, Yeah, the first was his brother. They both led the people here and helped make this village, and they have one descendant still alive. My idol Tsunade of the legendary 3, why?" Naruto said, "I just was remembering what my mother said, and when I told the Hokage about it, he said he thought he knew who my relative is, but he could not be for sure." Tenten said, "So you could be related to the first and second Hokage?" Naruto said, "Maybe, but I won't jump to conclusions. It does fit with what I have been told though." Tenten said, "Hold up, if you could be related to them, then does that mean they were Jedi?" Naruto sighed and deactivated his lightsaber before taking a meditative position and said, "Remember when I told you how there was a war and then afterwards fallen Jedi that became Sith started to hunt the Jedi? Well, the Jedi hid for a while, and my great-great-grandfather and his brother both hid on this planet. They were just going to live a hermit's life and coexist with the Force for the rest of their lives, but they saw people suffering and decided to help them. I was told they helped the people make this village. I was also told about 20 years ago my father, who was a descendant of Tier, met my mother when she was running from some Sith after her master was killed. She was just a little older than I am now, and she met my father. She married him and was going to quit being a Jedi, but taught my father about the Force after she discovered his lineage. Sadly, the Sith that killed her master came here to this planet and tried to kill her, but he was stopped by my father, so he." Tenten saw how Naruto stopped and said, "What's wrong?" Naruto sighed and said, "I think I should stop my story for now. The rest of the story only I know, and the third knows some of it but not all, so I think I should stop before I say something I shouldn't." Tenten saw the sadness in his eyes and said, "I understand, and if you need to talk to anyone, I am here." Naruto smiled and said, "Thanks, Tenshin," and raised his eyebrows as he realized what he said. Tenten blushed and said, "It's Chan now, huh?" Naruto said, "I am sorry, I hope I did not offend you." Tenten started laughing and said, "It's okay this time, but you can't call me Chan until I can call you Kun on your real name." Naruto said, "Fair enough. So do you want to learn some more about the Force?" Tenten said, "I would love to." Naruto said, "Okay, you remember how you were able to get a glance of the Force yesterday?" Tenten nodded and he said, "Okay, I want you to try that Aegean, but stay calm and relaxed and listen to me as I walk around you and try to see me in the Force." He got up when she sealed her sword and got into a meditative position. Naruto started circling her and said, "A Jedi's strength flows from the Force. It binds us and flows through us and all living things. When you are at true peace with yourself and the Force, you shall see the world in a new way. Relax and let the world flow through you. As Naruto was talking, Tenten was meditating and then saw the flash Aegean but did not get excited. Slowly the world around her went from multiple bright colors to more real colors. She saw the energy in the ground and the sky and everything around her. She saw Naruto walk into her view and saw a bright blue and white energy flowing out of him, but also saw a red and white energy flowing from him, but it was different from him. She decided to focus on that red energy since there was no red anywhere else, and then she jumped back when a face appeared in the energy. Tenten screamed and backed away and looked at Naruto, who ran to her side and said, "What's wrong?" in a concerned voice. Tenten said, "I saw the energy like last time, and then I saw you had blue and white energy, but you also had a red energy, so I looked at the red energy and I saw a face and it scared me." Naruto sighed and said, "So you saw him, huh?" Tenten looked confused and said, "Him who?" Naruto sighed and said, "I suppose I should tell you the rest of my story now since you saw it, so you won't be scared of me, but I think we should go to the Hokage's office first." Tenten nodded and slowly got up, looking at Naruto out of the corner of her eye. They quickly made it to the Hokage's office, and the two guards at the door said, "I am sorry, the Hokage is busy and can't be disturbed anymore today." Naruto waved his hand and said, "He will make an exception for us." Tenten looked at Naruto and both guards said, "I am sure he will make an exception for you," and opened the door. When Naruto and Tenten walked in and the guards closed the door, the Hokage quickly hid his ICHA book and said, "Nah. I mean, Ranger, what can I do for the two of you?" Tenten said, "How did you do that?" Naruto said, "The Force can have a strong influence on the weak-minded." The third said, "What did you do?" No. Naruto said, "I used the Force to convince the two guards to let us see you for a private talk." The third sighed and said, "If it was anyone else I would probably be concerned, so what brings you here today with Tenten?" Naruto said, "The Force lead me to Tenten and she is strong in it and I have started to teach her about it, but when she was learning to see and feel the Force she sort of saw traces of my guest, so I thought that before I finished my story we should come here." The third sighed and said, "Tenten, I want you to know right now that what you hear is considered an S-class secret. Do you understand?" Tenten nodded and Naruto said, "Well, where did I leave off?" Tenten said, "You told me about how your dad stopped the Sith from killing your mom." The third said, "Oh yes, I remember that. Continue." Naruto said, "Well, my mom was pregnant with me and they were scared for my safety, so they started making preparation. When it was almost time for me to be born, the Sith that attacked my mother used the Force like I did earlier on those guards. Speaking of old men, what's with the ABNU with the letter NA on their mask?" The third blinked and said, "Those are root ABNUI." Naruto said, "When I went to the academy, one of them was starting to get hostile, wanting to know who I was and everything, and I made him forget me." The third said, "Be careful around them. I don't control them, and the guy that does opposes me on everything, especially when it came to you. He wanted you to be made a secret weapon." Naruto sighed and said, "I understand. Anyways, the Sith used the Force to make the Gordian of the Fire Country attack our village. Now here is a question for you, Tenten. Do you know who the Gordian of Fire Country is?" Tenten thought for a moment and said, "No, I don't. Why?" Naruto said, "Not many do now. It is the Kyuubi no Kitsune." Tenten gasped and said, "So the Sith was the one responsible for the Kyuubi's attack. I feel sorry for him now, dying under someone's control." The third coughed and said, "Not exactly." Tenten said, "What do you mean?" Naruto said, "My father did not kill the Kyuubi since he knew the truth, so to stop it he sealed the Kyuubi instead into me." Tenten said, "So that red energy I saw was the Kyuubi and, wait a minute, your father? I thought the fourth Hokage was the one who stopped Kyuubi." The third said, "Perhaps it would be alright if you told her your real name as long as she does not tell anyone it." Naruto said, "The name you gave me or my real name?" The third said, "Both if you want." Naruto turned to Tenten and bowed and said, "Allow me to introduce the real me, Naruto Kazama, the son of Arashi Kazama Jedi Knight and 4th Hokage and Elisa Uzumaki Kazama Jedi Knight. To protect me from my father's enemies, the third here changed my name to Naruto Uzumaki, my mother's maiden name. Tenten though for a moment and said, I heard that name a few years ago. Oh, I remember. Some villagers were talking about how happy they were you were gone. I thought they were a bunch of. The third chuckled and said, yes, Naruto had a bad childhood because people thought he was the demon instead of a little boy. That was one of the reasons I have allowed Naruto here to go by the name Ranger. Now I want you to keep quiet about everything you heard today. Tenten said, I will. I do got one question though, is Naruto related to Tsunade-sama? The third stiffened and said, why do you ask? Naruto said, when Tenten saw my lightsaber she said it reminded her of a history book picture of the second's Raijin. If Raijin is a lightsaber then there is a chance that they are my ancestors. The third said, that is who I am guessing it is but I can't tell without a blood test. I wish I could tell you yes or no now Naruto. Naruto said, it's okay. One thing being a Jedi makes you as patient. The third said, that reminds me congrats on passing your test. Kakashi came in here demanding to know how you did that little stunt during the bell test. I told him he would have to ask you. I should warn you though that Kakashi was your dad's student and also your godfather. Naruto said, really? The third sighed and said, I made a lot of mistakes in taking care of you Naruto and for that I am sorry. Anyway I told Kakashi you died during the attack but I can swallow my pride and tell him the truth if you want. Naruto thought for a moment and said, not yet. I have one person I have to tell and ask for his advice before my secrets get out. The third said, who might that be? Naruto said, Mom called him Erozanin, she said he was dad's sensei. The third chuckled and said, Jiraiya, I will try and get a hold of him for you. Now I am guessing Tenten here is going to be your apprentice, am I correct? Naruto said, if she still wants to that is. I have already told her about almost everything about me and I have also told her about the Sith. If she still want to I will train her. The third said, very well, I just request that when you train to use the Force you use training ground 18 behind the Hokage Mountain about a mile. There are seals in that area that makes it where if anyone come into the area the user know. All you have to do is put a drop of blood on this scroll and you both will be the licensed users for those ground. They were your mom and dad's grounds so I know they are safe. Naruto nodded and bit his thumb and dropped a couple of drops of blood and then turned to Tenten. Tenten blushed and said, when we are training does that mean I can call you Naruto-kun? Naruto chuckled and said, as long as we are on the training grounds Ten-chan. She walked over and pulled a kunai out and cut her finger, dropped a few drops of blood on the scroll and started to reach for her first aid kit when Naruto grabbed her hand and held his other one above it, closing his eyes, and it started to glow green and then her wound healed. The third said, medical jutsu. Naruto said, no, force healing, I don't think I have chakra control for medical jutsus. The third said, I should warn you now you have already gotten a dangerous stalker. Naruto said, what do you mean? The third said, while you were gone the Uchiha clan was nearly killed off by one of their own. As of right now only 2 live. The one who killed the rest Itachi and his younger brother. Naruto said, Sasuke. The third said, Sasuke is mentally disturbed. I would have had him put away for mental reasons but the council would not allow it. Naruto said, is there anyone on the council not an idiot? The third said, the Naras, Aburame, Yamankos, Akamichi, and Hyuga clan leaders. Tenten said, the Hyuga clan head Hiash I have heard is cruel. The third sighed and said, I will tell you both a secret that only me and Hiash knows, so listen up. After the cloud incident that cost Neji's dad's life, Hiash wanted revenge against the Hyuga Council for forcing that to happen. He came to me in secret and has been my spy on the council and the clans for years now. I know that you may come to not like what he has had to do to his daughters and Neji, but the Hyuga Council tried to eliminate him and brand both his daughters with their family curse seal. I ask that you both try to not hold ill feelings for him because he is doing all he can until Hinata gets her confidence and claims her spot as clan head and eliminates the council and that seal permanently. Naruto sighed and said, I will, old man. But if he acts in a way I don't like in front of me, I may have to say something. It is my duty as a Jedi to help those in need. Tenten said, I guess I can understand, but my teammate is training to get at the main branch and I am afraid if he ever gets a chance he will take it out on Hinata. The third said, I will see what I can do to make sure he does not get a chance. If that is all, you are both dismissed. Naruto nodded and said, You ready? Tenten said, Not yet, and grabbed Naruto and kissed him before saying, I am now, Naruto-kun. Naruto chuckled and said, Don't you think we are moving a little fast? Tenten said, For some reason I feel I have known you forever. Naruto said, Me too, as they left, not hearing the perverted giggle coming from behind them. When they made it outside, Tenten said, So what now, Ranger? Naruto said, It sounds strange being called that from you from earlier. Tenten looked up at the sky and said, Crap, I was supposed to be at the shop an hour ago. Naruto said, I will come with you and explain how you were with me at the Hokage's office requesting a training ground so you can help me with weapon training. Tenten said as they started walking, You don't have to do that. Naruto said, Are we a couple now? Tenten looked at him and said, I suppose we are. Funny, if you would have asked me a few days ago who I thought I liked, I would have said Neji. Naruto said, So is it my ravaging good looks that got you to like me? Tenten said, No, though that's a plus, it was your eyes. Naruto said, My eyes. Tenten said, Yes, your eyes had a magic about them, and I don't mean the force. It was like I could see into your soul, and I liked the peace and confidence I saw in them. Naruto said, Thank you. You want to know why I started falling for you? Tenten said, My strong connection to the force. Naruto said, No, it's how at ease I feel around you. I feel I can tell you anything and you would be there to listen to it and tell me the truth about how you think of it. Though you do have a nice set of legs and beautiful hair. They arrived at the weapon shop and walked in, and a man behind the counter said, Oh, there you are, Tenten. I was getting worried something happened. Oh, who is this? He said, looking at Naruto. Naruto said, Hello, sir. Sorry for making Tenten late, but we were at the Hokage's office requesting a private training ground, so Tenten here can help me with my kenjutsu. The man looked at him and Tenten and said, If you were working on kenjutsu, don't you need a sword? Naruto said, I have something just as good as a sword, and we have not actually started training yet. We were only getting a training ground since new teams were started today. We did not know which grounds were open. The man said, Well, the name's Dustin and I am curious, can I see your weapon? If it's as good as a sword, I might need to make some. Naruto looked at Tenten and said, If you insist, but I doubt you will be able to make them. He then pulled out his lightsaber without activating it and handed it to the man. Dustin took it and paled and said, Where did you get this? Naruto said, I made it. Why? Dustin looked at Naruto and said, Tell me your name, boy. Naruto said, I go by Ranger. Dustin said, What is your real name? Naruto said, I don't know what you are talking about. Dustin moved and pushed Naruto against the door and said, Are you a Kazama? The Naruto who he was holding went up in a puff of smoke and the lightsaber in his hands flew behind him, and the real Naruto said, You seem to know these weapons, tell me how. Tenten said, Dad, what's going on here and why did you attack him? Dustin turned and saw Naruto holding the lightsaber still turned off and said, I can't believe you are alive, boy. Tenten went, Huh. Dustin said, Sorry about that, kid, or should I say Naruto? Naruto expression and said, Why do you call me that? Dustin said, I am probably one of the only people in this village who actually knows who you are. I know both your mother and father and who they were. Naruto said, and they were. Not revealing he knew the truth. Dustin said, a pair of knights as I can tell you are. Naruto said, I suppose then you know the truth then. Dustin said, yes I do and I also have something for you from your father. I will be back in a moment. And he left the room. Tenten looked at Naruto and saw the confusion on his face and said, so what now? Naruto said, I don't know. A few minutes later Dustin returned and had a scroll and said, I was told that when I saw you with a lightsaber to give this to you. I don't know what it says or is but here you go, as he handed the scroll to Naruto. Tenten said, Dad, how do you know his parents? Dustin said, I was a witness at their wedding, I was one of his dad's best friends away from his position. Tenten said, so you knew him away from the tower. Dustin said, it seems that you know more than I thought Tenten. Naruto said as he was reading the scroll, she knows everything including the truth of Kyuubi. Dustin chuckled and as he saw the second scroll Naruto unsealed and said, looks like the yellow flash shall return. Naruto looked up and said, huh. Dustin burst out laughing and said, I recognize the seals on that scroll because I made it. Inside are the Hiraishin no Jutsu, Flying Thunder God technique, Kuniyas. That's the technique that got your dad his nickname the Yellow Flash. Now why don't you tell me the truth about why you were late because I know if he is a knight his kenjutsu skills are better than yours. Naruto said, I asked her to be my apprentice. Dustin said, ah, I see. Well I don't have a problem with that as long as it does not interfere with her job here or her team training and missions. I do want you to be careful Tenten and listen carefully to him. Tenten said, I will Dad. Dustin said, good, now that that's settled I am going to lunch and get some rest. The store is yours Tenten and it was nice meeting you Ranger. Naruto bowed and said, it was a pleasure sir. Dustin chuckled and left and Tenten turned and grabbed Naruto and said, I love you. CYA later. Naruto kissed her and said, CYA later Tenheim, as he left not noticing the blush on her face. Naruto went to the training grounds the Hokage told him about and opened the scroll and read it Aegean. Naruto, if you are reading this then you have returned with or without your mother and I died along the way. For that I am sorry. Inside this scroll are the kuniyas for one of the two jutsu that made me famous. This is the Hiraishin no Jutsu kuniyas. To use them all you have to do is drop a drop of blood on each kuniya and when you want to use them charge some chakra into them and the seals on the kuniya do the rest. But you must learn the right amount of chakra, too much or too little and it won't work. My enemies have tried everything to figure out the secret of this jutsu but the answer is so simple that they overlook the obvious. I have left two scrolls sealed in this one. One explains the seals for the jutsu and the other are the kuniyas themselves. Anyways son I want you to know that I love you and I hope you have a happy life and may the force be with you, always. Your dad, Arashi Kazama, Yondaime Hokage of Konoha. Naruto unsealed the second scroll and saw the seals on it. He then created 10 clones and said, take this scroll and learn this seal. I want you each to try and copy it and when you got it memorize dispel except for one who will bring the scroll back to me then dispel. The clones took the scroll and went to the other side of the clearing. Naruto started working on the jutsu. The next day when Naruto got back to the memorial stone both Sasuke and Sakura were there. Just as Naruto arrived Kakashi appeared and said, good, I am glad to see you are all here. Today we are going to do a team mission I have already picked up. Follow me. Kakashi led them to a stream near the edge of town and said, the mission is to go into the water and remove any and all garbage you see in the river. Be careful because the current can get swift and the rocks are slippery. He then handed them 3 gurney sacks to put the trash in. Sasuke and Sakura both started walking in the water. Naruto though started walking on the water. Kakashi looked at him and said, I see you already know this, do you also know tree climbing? Naruto said, yes, as he continued to use the force to pick up any trash as he walked on top of the river. Sasuke looked at him and said, "How are you doing that? I demand you tell me." Naruto said, A. I don't answer to you, and B. This is a chakra control exercise. Sakura said, "Don't talk to Sasuke like that." Naruto sighed and sat down on top of the water in a meditative position and closed his eyes. Suddenly his and his teammates' bags flew into the air. Sasuke and Sakura were both picked up and carried to shore by nothing. Kakashi was watching this in awe, and then slowly the trash in the river started to slowly rise, starting just a little upstream from Naruto all the way to the waterfall 100 yards downstream and flew into the sacks. When it was done, the 3 sacks floated to his teammates and then sat on the ground. Naruto then opened his eyes and stood up before walking to shore. Sasuke looked at him and said, "Fight me." Naruto walked by him and said, "Mission complete. Is that all for the day?" Kakashi nodded and Naruto started to walk away. Suddenly he stepped to the side and ignited his lightsaber faster than anyone could see and sliced a kunai in half that was flying where he once stood. He turned to Sasuke and said, "Don't let your anger get to you. Anger leads to the dark side," and started walking away. If anyone would have looked at Kakashi, then they would have seen his one eye as big as it can get, and he was as pale as a ghost, thinking Arashi-sensei. Naruto walked toward the training grounds he practiced at the day before. Around noon Tenten showed up and Naruto said, "Ready to begin." Tenten walked over and kissed him and said, "I am no." And so their training began. At the same time another meeting of the minds was happening at the Hokage's office. "I am sorry Kakashi, I can't tell you. If you want to know you will have to ask him," the third said. Kakashi said, "Why can't you tell me if he is related to Sensei?" The third said, "All I can tell you is that something you have been told are lies. I have to wait until something happens before I can tell you the truth." "I am sorry." Kakashi sighed and said, "Fine," and left in a swirl of leaves. And that was how the first 3 weeks for Naruto went. Kakashi actually arrived on time a couple of times, hoping to get the answer to his question, and Naruto showing new skills. Sasuke getting more jealous and Sakura asking Sasuke on dates. Naruto would speed up the mission with help of Kajbunshin's or the Force and train Tenten whenever he could. He also worked on his father's jutsu that he left but is still having trouble with it. Tenten was progressing greatly and was preparing to move to a new rank and become an official Padawan. She was working on making her first lightsaber. Today when everyone got to their official meeting spot, Kakashi said, "Meet at the Hokage's office," and left in a swirl of leaves. When Team 7 made it to the Hokage's office, the third said, "Bring him in." A old man with a bottle of sake said, "Is this all you got me? Huh. I doubt they could even protect me. I am Tazana, the master bridge builder of Wave Country." Kakashi said, "I can assure you my team is skilled N." He was interrupted by Naruto, who said, "What are you hiding, sir?" The old man said, "I don't know what you're talking about, kid." Naruto said, "You're lying, I can see it." He then waved his hands and said, "Tell us the truth." The old man looked at them, then his eyes glossed over and he said, "Okay, I admit it, I lied. I only paid for a C rank mission because that's all the money my village had to pay. A little over a year ago a man named Gato came to Wave and used his merkin money to start taking over. He is afraid of my bridge because he will lose control of Wave. I have no doubt he will try to kill me and probably hired ninjas since he is so rich. I am sorry." The third sat quietly and said, "Nah. Ranger, go get Team Guy and have them come here. Kakashi, I am sending them with you." Kakashi paled and said, "Do you think that is necessary?" The third said, "This mission is at least a B, maybe a rank mission. I don't want to take the chance of something happening to any of you." When Naruto left, Tazana rubbed his head and said, "What happened? I feel like I got a hangover." The third said, "I am glad you told us the truth about this mission and we are sending an extra team with you to help." Sasuke said, "How did the Dobi do that? Are you teaching him privately, Kakashi?" The third said, "Ranger has a special skill that he can use." Even Kakashi does not know how he does that. Just then Naruto walked in and Team Guy right behind them. The third looked at them and said, "How did you all get here so fast?" Naruto said, "I told Guy that Kakashi wanted to test his power of youth on a joint mission." The third chuckled and Kakashi paled and said, "You know I am starting to hate you." Naruto said, "Don't worry, I will grow on you." The third said, "This is a joint mission to protect the client Tazana. You leave in 1 hour at the south gate." Dismissed. Naruto turned and said, "So have you finished it yet?" Tenten said, "All I have left is the final stage," as they walked out the door ignoring everyone else. Naruto said, "Well, bring it along and you probably can finish it on the way. Consider it part of your levitation training." Tenten nodded and leaned over and kissed him on the lips. Naruto returned it and it became more passionate. Kakashi had to quickly change his mask for blood coming out of it. Sakura was gaping. Sasuke was thinking that it was a waste of time. Neji was thinking that it was fated to happen and Guy and Lee were screaming about the power of youth. When they broke apart, Tenten said, "When I finish it, you're going to help me train, right?" Naruto said, "What kind of teacher would I be if I did not help my apprentice young Padawan?" Sasuke looked on with maniacal eyes as everyone went to pack. When they made it to the south gate, everyone was waiting on Kakashi. Naruto walked over to Tenten and said, "Why don't you start now while we wait?" Tenten nodded and unsealed a scroll and sat down in a meditative position. Naruto started walking around her and said, "Remember, let the force flow through you and be at peace with yourself and the universe around you." Everyone was looking at them like they were crazy. Suddenly a black cylinder started to float into the air. Then one by one the other items started floating, each getting into position and slowly started lining up. As they got closer, they moved slowly, getting into perfect alignment and then went inside the casing. Tenten opened her eyes and reached out her hand, and as she grabbed it, a yellow blade shot out of the end with a snap hiss. Everyone was in awe and Naruto reached into his cloak and tossed a scroll and said, "That is yours now, Padawan." Tenten unsealed it and a brown cloak like Naruto's was inside. Sasuke stomped over and said, "I demand to know how you do that." Naruto said, "Like I told you before. I don't answer to you." Sasuke turned to Tenten and said, "Fine, then you tell me." Tenten said, "Sorry, I am a Padawan apprentice and I am not ready to teach. There can only be two at a time anyways, a master and an apprentice." Sasuke became enraged and pulled back on a group of shurikens and launched it at Naruto and Tenten. Both activated their lightsabers and destroyed them all. Tenten was stunned and said, "How did I do that?" Naruto said, "You were still at peace and let the force guide you." Tenten said, "How did I see what he was going to do before he did it?" Naruto said, "The force can show you the future, the past and the present, but you should know that when it shows you the future it is not always right. The future is always in motion." Kakashi appeared just then and saw both Naruto and Tenten with lightsabers and sweat dropped and said, "Okay, what did I miss?" Naruto said, "Mr. High and Mighty attacked us Aegean with shurikens this time. We destroyed them. Nothing much." Kakashi nodded and Guy said, "Okay, youthful students, let's begin our journey, and if we cannot protect Tazana, I shall walk all the way to Wave and back 6 times on my hands without stopping." Lee said, "And if Guy Sensei cannot do that, then I will do it for him." They both started hugging Aegean and Naruto turned to Tenten and said, "Don't let it get to you. Release your anger." Tenten said, "But can't I just?" Naruto sighed and said, "Sorry. You know the rules." Tenten sighed and said, "Yes, master." Naruto said, "What did I tell you about calling me master?" Tenten said, "Well, it's the only way I can make sure I won't call you something else." The two teams started to leave and Guy said, "Neji, I want you to start checking for any signs of trouble every couple of minutes." Neji nodded and Tenten paled as something hit her and said, "Ranger, can I speak to you a second?" Everyone saw how she was nervous, so Naruto walked over to her and she put her hand to his ear and whispered, can your guest chakra be seen by someone who can see chakra? Naruto thought for a moment and said, I don't see why not, why? Tenten pointed to Neji with her head and said, his family can. Naruto nodded and said, we will cross that bridge when we get there. The group traveled for several hours when Naruto sensed something ahead and noticed Kakashi, Guy, Neji, and Tenten had also sensed it for different reasons. They continued on and saw two puddles in the road. Kakashi was reading his book and Naruto got an idea and said, Sensei, I swear when I find out who writes those books of yours I am going to do this to him. And stuck his hands out in front of him and lightning shot out of his hands and struck both puddles in the road. The genjutsu disappeared and both men who were still being hit by the lightning were on the ground rolling in pain. Naruto stopped and looked around as everyone else was sweat dropping. Naruto said, what? Kakashi said, that's it, tell me who taught you all this stuff. Naruto looked right at him with the most neutral face and said, my mother Elisa. Kakashi thought for a moment and then paled pointing a finger at Naruto and Naruto said, don't say anything now, we will talk in private later, right now we have two guys who are suffering from electrocution, as he turned to both of them and walked over to them. The taller one used his clawed hand to slash Naruto's arm as he walked over and the nin said, you may have hurt us but I killed you. Our weapons are poisoned and there is no cure. Naruto chuckled and looked at his arm as said, that would work if I was not immune to all poisons. As his arm started to heal in front of everyone with green, red and blue energy around where he was cut and the poison being pushed out the wounds that were healing. Naruto thought thanks Q. Kyuubi said, my pleasure Kit. Remember our deal, I look after you until we stop that man who ruined both our lives. Naruto thought I could never forget. Naruto blinked and Kakashi said, are you alright, you zoned out there for a moment. Naruto said, yeah, I was just balancing out my energy after healing the wounds. Nothing to worry about. Kakashi said, right, you think you can do that hand thing you did to Tazana on these guys? Naruto said, no, it only works on the weak-minded and these guys have mental blockers set up so I could not. Sasuke said, what was that lightning jutsu you used? I did not see any hand signs. Naruto said, there are none that's why. Sakura trying to get some brownie points said, well then tell Sasuke how to do it. Naruto said, if we were on any other planet I would sell you to a hut. Sakura said, what's a hut? Naruto said, a gaint slug that smells and thinks insults are compliments. Tenten said, like Tsunade's summons. Naruto said, no, I will show you one someday. I owe one a favor anyways and I don't like owing favors. Especially to a guy who gets his kicks out of shooting people out of his ship in escape pods at a sun. Neji said, you know you are not making any sense right. Naruto said, when you have seen what I have and been where I have then you can tell me about making sense. Kakashi who turned to deal with the two nins sighed and said, well we won't get no answers out of them now. Sasuke smirked thinking he could make his teammate feel guilty said, good job Dobi, you killed them. Naruto looked at them and said, well if I did oh well, we're ninja and we are trained to kill, but if you would look closer you would see they poisoned themselves with their own weapons. Sasuke looked and became pissed Aegean and said, HMPH. Kakashi said, these were Chunins, the next nins will probably be Junin. Do you all want to continue or turn back? Naruto said, I am going, it is the duty of a Jedi Knight to help bring justice to the galaxy. Sasuke said, you know you are full of yourself. 1 minute you claim to be a ninja then you claim to be a Jedi, whatever that is. I think you are full of hot air. Guy said, it's settled we will continue for the power of the springtime of youth. As the two teams started heading with the client for wave, everyone was in their own little world and thought. Sasuke I will find out how he is so strong and take it and then I will defeat my brother. Sakura I will find a way to get Sasuke to go out with me. Neji fate will decide what I must do. Lee I will show everyone the springtime of youth in honor of Guy Sensei. Guy, I will come up with a way to defeat my eternal rival Aegeon. Kakashi, how is he Sensei's son? Where has he been? Why was I told he was dead? Tenten, I sense something not right, but I don't know what it is. Naruto though was having different thought. What do you mean, Kyuubi? Kyuubi said, ever since that stunt I pulled to help you get away from him last year, the seal has been in overdrive, sucking power from me. Soon it will absorb all of me. Naruto sighed and said, is there anything I can do to stop it? Kyuubi said, no, the only thing is how soon it will happen. If you have to draw on my power for battle Aegeon, then it will be soon after. If not, it will probably be another year. Naruto said, well, I just want you to know you have been like a brother to me and I will miss you when you are gone, my friend. Kyuubi said, same here, kid. Do you sense that? Naruto cut the link and then thought, yeah, I do. Now talk later. The group was walking after being led across the river by boat, and now a thick fog was rolling in to cover the path. Everyone was getting into a defensive position and a voice said, I see why those idiots failed now. Sharingan, Kakashi and the green beast Guy. Guy said, show yourself. The voice said, sorry, but if I did that then you would have the advantage. Kakashi said, who are you at least? The voice said, you can call me the demon of the mist. Kakashi said, Momochi Zabuza, missing nin of the mist village. Laughter could be heard and suddenly 20 Zabuzas appeared and said at the same time, correct Kakashi, as they each pulled out a huge sword off their backs. Kakashi said, everyone defensive positions around the client. I don't know which one is real, so be on guard, as he uncovered his Sharingan eye. Tenten looked at Naruto and then they felt a massive amount of killer intent hit them. Guy and Kakashi were unfazed by it. Almost everyone else was pinned in fear. Sasuke started to grab at his neck from the pressure. Kakashi said, relax Sasuke, I won't let any of you die as long as I live. Zabuza said, brave words, fool. And the mist thickened, making it where you could not see farther than a foot in front of you. Guy and Kakashi both blasted chakra to move the mist. Naruto did also, but he cleared it enough to blast around all of the genins in the client. Everyone was in awe by the display of power, and Zabuza voice said, kid's got some power, but I bet he has no real skill, as a water clone appeared in front of Naruto Anta to receive a lightsaber blade in it, destroying the clone. Sasuke looked at Naruto and said, what the hell? Sakura said, what? Sasuke said, look at Ranger's eyes. That brought everyone's attention to Naruto and they all saw instead of his blue eyes he had the red eyes. Naruto said, don't worry about it and defend yourselves. Suddenly the sound of fighting could be heard and the sound of water hitting the ground in the middle of the battle. Sakura asked, does anyone know what's going on? Neji said, Kakashi and Gazensei are attacking the clones of Zabuza, but the real one is in a tree watching the battle with someone else. Just then several Senbon needles started flying at the genins. Neji jumped in their path and used Hake Shokaden, Heavenly Spin, to blow all the Senbons away from everyone. Just then the mist cleared and everyone could see Zabuza, and he said, it seems you are more skilled than I first thought. We shall return. And a mirror appeared in front of them and both Zabuza and the person beside him walked into it and disappeared. Kakashi sighed and pulled his Hayate back down and said, good job team, and passed out. Guy picked him up and said, let's continue, my youthful students. Tenten and Naruto took up position beside each other at the back of the group, and Tenten looked at Naruto, mostly at his eyes, and saw they were blue Aegean. They made it to Tazana house about 30 minutes later and met his daughter Tsunami and grandson Inari. Sakura said, is Kakashi-sensei going to be okay? Guy said, do not worry about my hip rival, he will be better later. I gave him a soldier pill to help with the chakra exhaustion. Now I want you all to go and get some rest. We have a busy day ahead of us tomorrow. Everyone started to head to the rooms except Guy when a beeping sound could be heard. Everyone started to look around except Naruto, who was reaching inside his cloak and pulled out a silver-looking piece of metal and pressed a button on it and heard a metallic voice say, Pathfinder to Ranger, Pathfinder to Ranger come in. Naruto said, what is it C4TNT? The device said, yes master, you asked me to notify you if any ships or communications were picked up entering or leaving the planet. A ship left the planet earlier today. I waited to track you until I had a bearing on where they might have been heading. Naruto said, and, the voice said, as best as I can tell the ship was heading toward the Korriban. Naruto nodded and said, I understand, continue scanning and keep Pathfinder ready for emergency evac and also prepare one of the guest rooms. C4TNT said, do you want me to prepare Elisa room for your guest? Naruto expression turned dark and said, no, leave that room alone. Out. And hit a button on the device and put it back in his cloak. Sasuke said, what was that? Naruto said with malice in his voice, nothing, and walked out the door leaving the rest stunned. Guy was wondering what he should do and said, okay, the rest of you get some rest, while looking at the door. Tenten started to go upstairs but stopped and started going toward the door and Guy said, where are you going Tenten? Tenten said, I am going to check on him. I won't be long, and ran out the door before he could stop her. Lee looked at the door and said, Guy sensei, is Tenten turning her back to the power of youth? Guy said, no my precious student, she is showing the power of the springtime of youth and checking on a friend. Lee said, Guy sensei I shall do the same thing when I need to. Guy said as he stuck his thumbs up and said, that's the way to show your youth Lee. Neji having enough of them already said in a nice guy pose, no you cannot leave because you are fated not to have any friends so your springtime of youth fails. And walks off hearing both Guy and Lee scream, no. When Tenten walked outside she saw Naruto on a dock not too far from the house and walked out to him. As she got there she said, are you okay? Naruto sat quietly and Tenten sat patiently knowing he will talk when he is ready. Finally he said, I was getting mad at my droid for doing his job when he mentioned my mom. It has been 2 years since she died and I should be over it but it's hard sometimes. I am glad I got him sometimes but he reminds me of how I got him in the first place. A little over a year ago I walked into a trap set by Darth Chaos on Nar Shaddaa. I was an idiot. Flashback. Naruto had gotten a lead on another planet that had a Jedi enclave on it so he could finish his training. He had heard a man by the name of Orochi who was on Nar Shaddaa had information on it. So after getting there he asked around and found an old street bum who said the man he was looking for worked as a bartender at the Outer Rim bar. It did not take Naruto long to track down bar and went inside. Everything looked normal and Naruto did not sense anything out of the ordinary and a Twi'lek girl walked over and said, can I help you with something kid? You don't look like the type to come in here. Naruto said, I am looking for a man by the name of Orochi, I was told he had some info I am needing. The girl said, I can tell you where he is but it would cost you 20 credits, though I don't know why you are looking for that idiot. Naruto said, it is a personal matter and here is your credits. Handed her some money he made for doing some part-time help. The girl checked it and said, he is in the back of the bar past the containment zone thought you can't go back there without a respirator. It's a methane sector. Naruto said, where can I get one at? The girl said, the bartender over there sells them for 100 credits. CYA and walked off. Naruto walked to the bar and said, I need a respirator. The man behind the bar said, what do you need one for kid? Naruto said, I need to speak with Orochi and I was told he is in the methane sector. The bartender looked around the bar and said, sure kid he is, it will cost you 200 credits though. Naruto said, I was told 100. The bartender said, I get a handling fee you know, take it or leave it. Naruto sighed and paid the money and went to the containment doors entering the first one and when it sealed behind him the chamber filled with yellow gas and then the second one opened. Naruto walked in and walked toward the bar and when he got there the bartender said, what can I get you airbrother? Naruto said, I am looking for Orochi. The bartender said, who wants to know? Naruto said, Mr. Kajbunshin. The bartender said, I don't answer questions for free, it will cost you 50 credits. Naruto checked his pocket and said, I got 15. If your info is good, I will work for you to pay the rest as a waiter for an hour. The bartender said, fine, and took the money and pointed to the back corner and said, he's the tall man with gills on his face in the very back with a scar on his cheek. Naruto nodded and walked over to the table and saw a man fitting the description and said, I am looking for Orochi. The man with the scar said, I am Orochi, who wants to know? Naruto said, my name is not important, but I was told you had info on a Jedi Enclave's location. Orochi looked at Naruto and said, yeah, I do, but you have to tell me what you need it for. Naruto said, I need to finish my training. Orochi started nodding like he was thinking it over, and Naruto was focusing on him, not really paying attention, when suddenly 2 pairs of arms grabbed him from the back and someone pulled his respirator off. The last thing Naruto saw was Orochi smiling, saying, that was the easiest 10,000 credits we ever earned. Naruto woke up in white bed with a medical droid standing over him running test on him. Naruto tried to get up and heard laughter and turned and saw a giant green slug-like creature laughing as he floated over on a hovercart coming toward him, and the Twi'lek girl from before with him. Naruto said, where am I? The slug said, you are lucky, Jedi. If Milia here had not come and told me about you coming in my bar, you would be in the hands of the Sith right now. Naruto said, what are you talking about? The slug turned and pointed to a screen that came on and saw himself being dragged out of the bar by 3 men, and saw the Sith that killed his mother walk into the bar and heard him say good job and paid them to take Naruto to his ship. The screen went blank and the slug said, I had some of my men intercept them and bring you here. You should have died from all the methane you breathed, but that red energy you had around you cured most of it. My medical droids were able to do the rest. Naruto said, who are you? The slug started laughing Aegean and said, that's rich, I am Jirigo the Hutt, I own a fourth of this moon here. Naruto said, sorry, I have never met a Hutt before. The Hutt said, don't cuss me, human. Naruto was getting mad because he did not cuss and said, listen here, you rotten piece of shit. I did not cuss you, but I will now slimeball. The Hutt laughed Aegean and said, flattery after insult, you have some guts, Jedi. Anyways, the reason I saved you is because the man who wanted you, Darth Chaos, has been getting into my business as of late and had been bringing gold and jewel to sell and buying weapons to sell somewhere. Normally I would not care as long as he paid me my share of the profits, but he is ignoring me completely and it is making me look weak in front of the other Hutts. I saved you because I want you to remove him for me. Naruto said, I have my own reasons to stop him, he is responsible for the deaths of both my parents. The Hutt said, I guess you are not too old to learn something new. I thought Jedi were forbidden from having children, oh well. I have decided to help you a little in advance to get rid of this Sith for me. I know sooner or later he will come for you or you for him, so I know it's a safe bet. I will give you one of my best astromech assassin droids as an assistant to you. Naruto said, why would I need that? The Hutt said, what you do with it is none of my concern, except it won't be allowed to leave your ship. I have already found it and he is on board. It is a way to safeguard my investment. If you die, I get your ship. If you kill the Sith, you get to keep the droid and my business picks up. It's a win-win situation for me. Naruto sighed and said, fine. I agree. The Hutt said, you had no choice, but it's nice knowing you agree to my favor. Anyways, I must go, I have a show to attend to. Naruto said, what kind of show? The Hutt said, just some fun. Come with me if you want. Naruto followed and got on one of the Hutt's spaceship. When they got into orbit, they flew toward the sun of the solar system, and Naruto was standing by the Hutt when several guards brought the 3 men that captured Naruto earlier into a storage room, and the Hutt said, put them in. The guards shoved the 3 men into an escape pod and everyone watched as it was shot off into the Hutt's sun with the 3 men's screams blaring over the speakers. Flashback end. And that was how I got the droid C4 Tient, Naruto said. Tenten said, what's a droid? Naruto said, Basically, it's a machine that has human abilities based on what it is programmed to do. I had mine reprogrammed a little to make it a personal assistant also, as well as mechanic for Pathfinder. Tenten said, "What is Pathfinder?" Naruto said, "It's the spaceship my parents left here for me so I could meet Mom when the time was right." Tenten said, "Can I see it sometime?" Naruto chuckled and said, "Who do you think the guest room was for?" Tenten said, "Oh." After a few minutes, Tenten said, "Why are you having him look for ships coming and leaving this planet?" Naruto said, "As best as I can tell, the only other person who should come here in a spaceship should be Darth Chaos. The fact that the ship was heading toward the Sith homeworld is another clue." Tenten said, "Any idea what he was doing here since he lost track of you?" Naruto said, "I think he is selling weapons for gold and jewels like the Hutt told me, and probably has someone keeping an eye out for me here since it was a safe bet I would return." Tenten nodded and they both sat in peace for a few moments. Naruto broke the silence and said, "Thank you." Tenten said, "For what?" Naruto said, "I was mad earlier and you helped me get over it sooner than I normally would. With all the bad stuff that has happened lately, I have not been keeping my emotions like I should." Tenten looked at him and said, "What bad stuff?" Naruto said, "I just found out that Kyuubi is dying because he saved my life from that ambush. He used most of his energy to save me, and since he does not have his own body anymore, he can't produce new chakra. All the chakra he had when sealed into me is all he could have, and with all the times he saved me from villagers who thought I was a demon as a child, and then the attack, he is almost out, and when he does he will die." Tenten said, "That reminds me, when that Zabuza guy attacked earlier, your eyes turned red. Do you have a bloodline limit or something?" Naruto chuckled and said, "Actually no. My eyes changed color because my chakra has changed a little from making just normal human chakra to a mixture of both demon and human chakra, so if I force chakra into my senses to make them better, my eyes change color as a side effect." Just then Naruto tensed and said, "I guess he is wanting to talk sooner than later." Tenten, who had not been paying attention, said, "Huh," and looked back and saw Kakashi walking from the house toward them. She said, "Do you want me to go?" Naruto said, "I don't have secrets from you, so you can stay." When Kakashi arrived, he said, "Ranger, can I talk to you alone?" Naruto said, "Sorry Kakashi sensei, but I don't keep secrets from Tenten." Kakashi sighed and said, "On the way here you said your mother was Elisa." Naruto interrupted him and said, "I suppose you want to know where have I been, why were you told I was dead, how I know what I know and all that, right?" Kakashi said, "Well, yeah." Naruto turned to look at him and said, "How much do you actually know about the Kyuubi attack?" Kakashi said, "I know that sensei died killing the—" Naruto interrupted him Aegean and said, "You and I both know that the Kyuubi's not dead yet, Kakashi, so skip the official story." Kakashi said, "What do you mean?" Naruto sighed and said, "I guess Dad never got around to tell you why the Kyuubi attacked in the first place. Not surprising with everything that happened, hell, the third did not know the real reason until recently." Kakashi said, "Perhaps it is best if you just start from the beginning." Naruto sighed and said, "My mother was a Jedi. She came to this planet to escape from a group of evil Jedi called the Sith." Kakashi interrupted and said, "I remember you mom saying that, but I thought she was joking about other planets." Naruto said, "No interrupting, anyways I will skip until Mom became pregnant with me. The Sith that were after her tracked her here to this planet and was stopped from killing her by Dad. The Sith waited, and when Mom was weakened because of her getting ready to have me, he went to the den of the Kyuubi, who may have been a demon but is also the guardian of the fire country, and used the force to control it to attack Konoha as a distraction to stop and hopefully kill Dad. Anyways, as you know, Dad was late getting to the battle with Kyuubi for some reason. The reason was the Sith snuck into the village and attacked Mom, sending her into labor with me. Mom and Dad since the first attack had made preparations if he returned, so since Mom was weakened and could not defend herself and knew what Dad was getting ready to do, took her ship and left the planet to lure the Sith away from me." Kakashi said, but why did she not take you? Naruto said, I was needed elsewhere. Kakashi said, what do you? No, you don't mean to. Naruto interrupted him by raising his shirt a little and channel chakra enough to make the seal appear and said, Dad needed a container to save Kyuubi life and stop the attack. The third changed me name to protect me from Dad's enemies here on this planet and gave me Mom's maiden name. When I was 5, Dad's spirit came to me since I was already strong in the Force and told me to speak to the third. The third took me to Dad's spaceship where I left this world and met Mom. She started training me until 2 years ago. Kakashi said, what happened? Naruto said, the Sith that caused all of this named Darth Chaos attacked a Jedi enclave we were at and killed her. I managed to escape and I returned the day before we got our team. Kakashi looked at Tenten and said, you know all of this? Tenten nodded and Kakashi said, I was told you were dead, I was to be your godfather, Naruto, or what is your actual name? Naruto said, my actual name is Naruto Kazama, but until I reach certain rules I can't claim it. So to make my life easier I am going by the name I went by for the last 2 years so I don't have the villagers trying to kill me again. Kakashi said, what are the rules? Naruto said, Chunin, marriage or. Tenten said, your other blood relative returns and claims you. Kakashi said, other blood relative. Tenten said, based on what Naruto was told we think we know who his other relative is and if she returns and claims him he can go by his real name. Kakashi said, who is it? Tenten smiled and said, Tsunade-sama. Kakashi paled and said, if she is the third as a dead man. Naruto said, what do you mean? Kakashi said, what do you know about Tsunade? Naruto said, besides she's one of the legendary 3 and a medic nin nothing, why? Tenten looked at Naruto and said, you mean you don't know? Naruto asked, know what? Kakashi said, Tsunade is super strong. She can punch the ground and made a crack in it for up to a mile. Naruto paled and said, remind me never get on her bad side. Kakashi said, I am more worried about the Hokage. If Tsunade is related to you then she must be related to Arashi-sensei since your mother is not from this planet. I wonder how she is related to him though. Naruto said, we will worry about that later. She may not even be related to me, it could be someone else as far as we know, and the person I am related to could already be dead. Tenten said, I know it's Tsunade, I can feel it. Naruto sighed and said, so what's up for no? Zabuza will be back soon and probably bring help. I know I can handle myself some and Tenten is getting better every day. Sakura is useless as she is right now and Sasuke is too much of an emo avenger to do anything right. Kakashi leaned against a rail and said, tell me about it, I just want to shove a Chidori through him sometimes. Naruto jumped up and pointed a finger at Kakashi and said, you think so also? Kakashi sighed and said, the only reason I put up with his crap is because the council is forcing the Hokage into it. If I had my choice I would kick him out of the ninja program altogether. Hey, I tell you what. Since I am your godfather and I feel bad about not being there for you when you were younger, how about I help you learn some new jutsu since the report I had on your skills shows you don't know much. Naruto said, only if you include Tenten, and what about emo boy? Kakashi looked at Tenten and said, Sasuke has not awoken his bloodline yet and I know I won't be able to teach you much when he does because of the council, so what I will do is give you scrolls of jutsu I want you to learn on your own, then I will give you more when you learn the first set. I will include Tenten also since you both will probably get married one day anyways. You have the same look as your parents. Naruto and Tenten both had blushes on and Tenten said, what do you mean? Kakashi said, when I see you both it is almost like a mini-version of Naruto's parents. Naruto, who still had a blush, said, Kakashi, just don't call me that name or mine and Tenten's life will get harder quick. Kakashi thought for a moment and said, right Ranger. Just then a beeping sound was heard and Naruto reached into his cloak and pulled out his communicator before he sighed and said, this had better be important, Tinhead. C4 said, Sorry to interrupt Aegean, but an encoded message was just sent to this planet by subspace and relayed, and I was able to intercept it and decode it and thought you should hear it. It had video, but I was only able to get the audio decoded. Naruto said. Go ahead with what you got. Looking at Tenten and Kakashi. There was a few beeps then. Good, everyone is here. A voice Naruto recognized as Darth Chaos. And just for those who are saying I am getting off track here, in the manga and the show they never show the actual leader, it is always a hologram, and so I was thinking a hologram would fit in with Star Wars, just like the Raijin looks like a lightsaber in a way, so don't get mad over this. Thanks. Another voice said. What is it you want now, leader? Yeah. Darth Chaos said. Has the sample weapon shipment been received in Wave Country by Gato yet? Another voice said. Yes, leader. They made it there last week. Darth Chaos said. Good. I want all of you to start preparing to find all 9 demon containers so we can capture them. A voice Kakashi recognized as Itachi said. But leader, the vessel for the Kyuubi disappeared almost 8 years ago and is presumed dead. Darth Chaos said. The Kyuubi vessel has returned and is stronger than before. Itachi, I want you and Kisame to find him. I believe he is heading for Konoha and should be there soon. My sources tell me that he has changed his name to Ranger. If you can capture him, but if he fights, I want you to kill him and bring me the body. Don't worry, the plan will still work with only 8 demons. Itachi said. Yes, leader. We will wait until after the Chunin exams finals in Konoha to go and look for him. Security should be lax then, especially with Orochimaru plans to attack them during the Chunin exams. Darth Chaos said. Very well, and don't fail me. Oh, one more thing. I have information that he has a weapon that is like the Raijin. I want you to bring it to me for study. Goodbye. C4 said. That's all the transmission, sir. Any further orders? Naruto said. Just continue your previous orders. Out. He turned to the others and said. I don't know who those other voices were, but the one they called leader is Darth Chaos. Kakashi said. The one Chaos called Itachi is Sasuke's older brother, and the only Kisame I know is a missing nin from Mist who was also a member of the 7 swordsmen like Zabuza. Tenten said. Why would Orochimaru attack Konoha? Kakashi said. He hates the village because he was passed up for the position of Yondaime and was doing illegal human experiments. The thing that has me worried the most is the weapons that were delivered to Gato. I wonder what kind they are. Naruto was in thought for a moment and said, most likely blasters. Kakashi said, how dangerous are they? Naruto looked at the sky and said, for me about a 1 in 100 chance of being killed, for Tenten 3 out of 100 chance, for the rest of you 85 plus chance being killed by 1. I can deflect most with my lightsaber since I have been trained to do so. Tenten is closest to my skill with hers. Anyone else hit with it could be killed based on where you were hit by it. Think of them light my lightsaber but long range. Kakashi said, this just keeps getting better and better. Anyways, it's getting late, so why don't we all get some rest? Everyone nodded and went inside. Tenten went to a room with Sakura. Naruto with Neji, Sasuke and Lee, and poor Kakashi had the front room with Guy, the horror. The next day when Team Guy stayed at Tazuna's house to guard his family while Team 7 headed toward the bridge. When they got closer, a crowd of workers were at the begging of the bridge and Tazuna said, what's going on, why are you not working? A worker pointed to the bridge and said, look. Everyone looked and saw a figure laying on the ground with his head in the lap of another figure. The figure on the ground could be seen as Zabuza. Team 7 approached them and Kakashi said, what's going on here? The person who was holding Zabuza looked up and said in a female's voice, please help him, he's dying. Kakashi said, what happened? The girl said, please help him, I will answer all questions but he is dying and I don't know how to help him. Naruto looked at Zabuza and walked toward him and said, blaster fire. As he pulled out a scroll and unsealed a pack of scare bandages and started placing them on Zabuza wounds. Sasuke said, what are you doing, Dobi? Naruto said, in saving his life. These wounds are serious, but they miss the life-threatening areas. These Bacta wraps should have him on his feet in a day or two. Now why don't you tell us what happened and what your name is? The girl nodded and said, my name is Haku, I am Zabuza assistant. When? Flashback. After Zabuza and Haku left the battle with the Konoha ninja, they went back to Gato's base. When they got there, they started to plan to finish their mission. Just then Gato walked in with 2 guards and said, is that old fool dead now? Zabuza said, no, we only went out to judge the strength of his bodyguards. We were just discussing how to end it. Gato said, I am disappointed in you, Zabuza. Oh well, I never planned on paying you anyways, and thanks to these new weapons I don't ever have to hire missing Nin Aegean. And the 2 men pulled out a blaster each, and Gato said, I still can't believe what these things can do. I only bought 5 off of those men at 100 bars of gold and 10 jewels each, but it was worth it. Kill them. The 2 men started laughing, and then a loud noise hit everyone's ears as 2 flashes of red energy shot out and hit Zabuza in the back, who jumped in front of Haku at the last second. Haku created an ice mirror on the floor and grabbed Zabuza as they fell through it, teleporting away. End flashback. And I brought him here hoping you might help him, since I know no one else who might know how to. Haku stated, looking down at Zabuza. Sakura said, what do we do with them now? Sasuke said, we should kill them. They're our enemies. Kakashi said, not anymore, and besides they gave us some valuable information on Gato. I say we should head back to the house and prepare for Gato. Tazuna looked at Gato, imagining himself with those wounds, and said, I agree. Listen up everyone. I want all of you to take the rest of the week off, and hopefully we can have this over with by then. All the workers left, shooting glances at Zabuza. Kakashi sighed and said, can he be moved? Naruto, who had his eyes closed and his hand on Zabuza's head, opened his eyes and said, yes, he can now. Haku said, what did you do to him? Naruto said, I treated his wounds the best I can and put him in a forced medical coma so his body will work on healing. When he wakes up he will be so hungry he will feel he has not ate in a week. Kakashi said, Sasuke, Sakura, I want you to help Haku carry Zabuza back. Sasuke said, why can't Adobe? Kakashi said, Ranger has been using his energy already from saving Zabuza's life, and also is the only one of us who can defend against those weapons that Gato has. Sasuke said, how do you know this? Kakashi, not wanting to put up with his shit, said, it's my job to know this stuff, dumb. Now hurry up or I will have you sleep in the same room as Guy and his carbon copy. Sasuke paled and picked Zabuza up with the other 2's help. The way back was uneventful, except Sakura shooting glances at Haku and Zabuza in fear, and Sasuke shooting glances of envy at Naruto. As they neared the house, everyone stopped as several loud blasts could be heard, and Haku said, that's those weapons. Naruto ran off toward the sound, ignoring the voice of Kakashi telling him to stop. As Naruto arrived at the edge of the woods by Tazuna's house, he could see Gato and 5 mercenaries shooting at Tazuna's house with blasters. He could still feel Tenten presence in the force inside the house, but could not tell where. He sighed, knowing she was alive. He quickly took stock of the surroundings and saw that he could not approach Gato or his men without crossing the firing range of the blasters. He was confident he could block the blaster, but it only took 1 shot to kill him, and it never paid to take a gamble unless you had to. He quickly started thinking about what he could do. Mind control was out, too many men, and he could not get in range to do it. Cage buncheons were out, blast hit them and keeps on going as they go up in smoke. He looked at the blasters and they all had straps wrapped around the shoulder of each man, so force pull was out. Henge and replacement were both out. Force lightning was out because he could only take out 2 at a time, and if they moved they could dodge. Hirshin was out also because he could only do it within 30 feet so far, and the men were about 150 yards away from the house, across a bridge and by another tree line. Naruto sighed inwardly and thought, what can I do to save Tenten and the others? Suddenly a voice Naruto had not heard since he was 5 said, son, quite thinking of the force as just what you were taught to use it with yourself. Think about how the Force works with nature and the world around you, not just binding them but can control and be controlled by them. Use the Force's connection to the rest of the world also, son. Naruto was perplexed by this, thinking what it could mean, and then remember what he told Tenten. Flashback. Tenten said, "What is the Force?" Naruto turned to her and said, "It is a life energy that connects all living things together." Tenten said, "I don't understand." Naruto said, "I said the same thing when my mother told me about it. Basically, it's like chakra but more powerful and abundant. Chakra in natural energy made by things. The Force is created from the living energy of all life, not just inside of one object but in trees, plants, the water, the sky, other people, even this planet and others." Flashback end. Naruto thought that's it, and closed his eyes to concentrate. He tuned out the noise of the battle going on up ahead and started thinking about the world's connection to the Force. Slowly he lifted up his left hand and reached out with the Force until he felt the trees around him. At first it was just a simple brush of energy. He then focused on that energy and felt his whole being was becoming one with it. He then lifted his right hand and felt for the water that was between him. The flow of the Force in the water was like a thunderbolt hitting him. It knocked his concentration away by the force of it. He tried again, but this time let the energy flow through his unhindered and uncontrolled. Naruto lowered his hands and opened his eyes and looked at the world and saw it in a new light. He could literally see the Force in nature as it went by him. He then looked at Gado's men and raised his right hand quickly, and the water in the stream rose up quickly and made a wall to block the men's view of the house. Just then Kakashi arrived with the others. Kakashi was in awe, and then Naruto, ignoring the newcomers, completely raised his left hand and pulled it close to his body and closed his fist. Suddenly screams could be heard on the other side of the wall of water. Naruto lowered his right hand and Gado and his men were being held tight by tree roots. Kakashi looked on and thought that's the first and second's abilities. Naruto sighed before passing out on the ground as the energy left him. Kakashi walked over to Gado and his men who were still bound and killed the men except Gado with a kunai and walked to Gado and said, "It's time we had a little talk. I want to know where you got those weapons from and how." Gado said, "I won't tell you, but if you release me I will pay you greatly." Just then a sending needle entered his temple and killed him. Kakashi looked over and saw Haku putting 2 more senbons back in her weapons pouch. Kakashi sighed and walked over to where Naruto was still face down on the ground. Just as he was checking on him, Inari, Tsunami and Team Guy came out. Tenten saw Naruto and feared the worst and ran over to him and screamed, "Naruto-kun," as she baseball slide to the ground beside him, picking him up and rocking him, thinking he's dead. Everyone was thinking the same thing except Kakashi. "Naruto-kun." Naruto slowly opened his eyes and saw he was being held by Tenten, who had her eyes closed and was crying, and said, "You know you're still beautiful even when you're upset." Tenten squealed as she heard his voice and buried her face into his chest and said, "I am sorry, Naruto-kun. I thought you were dead when I saw Kakashi standing over you like that." In between sniffles and a hiccup, Naruto just shushed her and said, "It's okay, Tenheim. I am here and okay. I passed out from the mental fatigue from using the Force the way I did." Sakura looked around the area and said, "Ranger, how did you control the trees like that?" The only person to ever do anything like that was the first Hokage. Naruto looked over at the dead men and said, "I am not sure. I heard my dad's voice and it told me to remember something, and when I did I understood how to stop them." Lee took this moment and said, "Ranger is overflowing with the power of youth, that the water and trees is under his control, and his youthfulness is so strong he is known by more than one name." Guy Sensei, can I become known as more than one name? Guy did the nice guy pose and said, "Yes, you can, my youthful student, but you must train like Tenten and Ranger is. If not, Tenten will have another name like Naruto-kun." Everyone's sweat dropped except Naruto, who was thinking crap. But looked at Tenten, who had her eyes on the ground, feeling bad because she spilled Naruto's secret. Naruto put his hand behind her head and pulled her into a passionate kiss, and then stuck his tongue to her lips. Tenten went wide-eyed at this but closed them and opened her lips a little so that his tongue could enter her mouth. As his tongue touched hers she moaned as the sense of energy pleasure filled her whole body. She started to wrestle his tongue with hers and fought him back into his mouth exploring it. Just then perverted giggling could be heard and they both broke apart panting looking over at Kakashi who was smiling behind his mask and Sakura was pointing at them gaping. Naruto said, "Close your mouth Sakura or a Minec might mistake it for a home." Sakura closed her mouth with an audible snap. Kakashi said, "Well, as of now the client is safe." Tazuna said, "I don't know how the people of Wave will ever repay you." Naruto got up and walked over to where the tree roots still bound the bodies of the dead men and took a moment and had the roots release men before he took the blasters. Sasuke saw this and said, "What do you think you're doing, Dobi?" Naruto said, "Taking these weapons." Sasuke walked over to the blaster Naruto had took and reached for one as it flew off the ground to Naruto. Sasuke said, "Give me one of those weapons. As an Uchiha I have the right to them." Naruto, who had just finished pulling the last blaster free and had the other 4 floating by him, turned and said, "No," and started messing with the blasters before he threw them all in the river. Sasuke said, "What the hell do you think?" He never got to finish as 5 explosions happened in the water. Sasuke had turned at the first one to see the water come up from the blast and after the last one he turned and said, "Fine. You destroy my weapons I will take yours," and pulled out a kunai and charged at Naruto. Naruto pulled out his own and started deflecting all the slashes from Sasuke. Sasuke jumped back and started doing hand seals before saying, "Kaden Phoenix Fireball Jutsu," as several fireballs shot at Naruto jumped into the air and made 10 cage buncheons which got into a circle around Sasuke. Sasuke took out 2 handfuls of shurikens and threw them at Naruto. Meanwhile everyone was looking on and Sakura said, "Kakashi-sensei, are you going to stop this? Ranger will get hurt." Kakashi snickered and said, "Sakura, grow up. Sasuke is not that great and this has been building up for a while now," as he watched Sasuke get kicked into the air by several clones. He heard a gasp behind him and then he heard Lee's voice said, "Guy-sensei, he made an attack version from my move." Guy said, "Yes Lee, he asked me after the first time since he is weak in Taijutsu if he saw some moves he could use in his style when he came to meet Tenten could he use them and I allowed it since he asked and was willing to work for them." Kakashi heard this and thought, so his Taijutsu is weak huh? Well I think I might be able to help him there. Ouch. That's going to leave a bruise. Naruto and Sasuke's fist both hit the other's cheek at the same time and they both flew backwards. Sasuke got up to one knee and was panting as was Naruto. Naruto looked into Sasuke's eyes and thought what the. Kakashi and Guy both thought the Samething Sharingan. Sasuke started making seals Aegean and called out, "Kaiden, Grand Fireball Jutsu," as a huge fireball shot at Naruto. Naruto acted on pure instincts and brought his arm up to defend himself and a wave of water came out of the river and blocked the fireball. When Sasuke was this he threw 3 kunai into the water where Naruto was and then charged following where he was. When he arrived on the other side of the wall of water soaking wet he looked down and saw Naruto face down on the ground. He smirked and said, "Loser. I will take this now," as he reached for the lightsaber on Naruto's belt. Just then 10 kunais landed on the ground in a circle around him and he looked up and saw Naruto standing upside down on a tree limb and the Naruto on the ground disappear in a puff of smoke. Tenten, who saw this, gasped and said, "He is going to use that." Everyone looked at her and then back at Naruto and Kakashi's one eye got bigger as he recognized the kunais. Sakura said, "Use what?" He missed Sasuke. Kakashi said, "If he can use it then whatever you do don't blink or you will miss it." This got the attention of everyone who heard it except Naruto and Sasuke who were too far away to hear it. Naruto said, "Surrender now Sasuke or I will have to hurt you." Sasuke said, "Like you could. Bring it on." Naruto sighed and said, "As you wish, though I think you should be the second person to see me use this and the first time in battle." He smirked and disappeared in a yellow flash. Guy, who instantly knew what it was, looked at Kakashi and said, "Kakashi, did you?" He stopped when he saw Kakashi shaking his head no and turned back to see another yellow flash. Naruto flashed between the kuniyas and punches Sasuke toward his next target as he flashed Aegean. Sasuke was a pinball stuck in a world of hurt. A punch to the face, another to the ribs, a knee to the groin, another to the face, one to the back, an uppercut to the jaw, a kick to the knee, a punch to the shoulder joint, another to the other knee, one more to the other shoulder, and finally a clothesline, dropping him to the ground battered, bruised, and having trouble breathing. Sakura ran over to Sasuke crying because he lost. Neji looked on with interest from never seeing an attack like that before, but thought it was nothing compared to the Hyuga gentle fist style. Guy and Lee were both ranting about the power of youth. Tenten looked on with pride as Naruto started picking up the kuniyas. Kakashi was wondering where he learned it, and when Naruto walked over he said, "How did you get that and when did you master it?" Naruto said, "I received it from someone who was entrusted with it when I returned from my Jedi training, and I have not mastered it yet. I only have it figured out in a short range area. Any farther than that range won't work, and I don't know why yet, but I am sure I will find the answer in the scrolls." Kakashi nodded and said, "Well, let's get some rest. Sakura can help Sasuke."